The fluorescent lights hum above Danielle Ross as she restocks the pediatric supply cart at Sacred Heart, scrubs the color of wet concrete against her pale skin. Third day. She keeps her eyes down, movements economical and practiced, the way someone walks through a room when they've learned that visibility equals vulnerability. Brown hair pulled back so tight her scalp aches. Hand steady as surgical steel, except for the tremor that comes at 3 a.m. and sometimes at noon when the fluorescents buzz at a particular frequency that triggers something she won't name. The pediatric ward smells like antiseptic and children's shampoo, cherry-flavored, probably from the lollipops they hand out after blood draws. Danielle breathes through her mouth. She has learned not to smell things. Smell carries memory, and memory carries complications. Dr. Hargrove watches her from the medication dispensary, his posture the kind of casual that isn't casual. Head of pediatrics for 11 years. His Rolex catches the overhead lights, $14,000 watch that gets polished every Friday by a jewelry service that charges more per hour than most nurses make in a day. He's been observing the new hire since orientation, the quiet one who doesn't introduce herself at staff meetings, who folds her jacket in her locker like it contains something fragile. What he doesn't see is that Danielle's hands move with precision that has nothing to do with civilian nursing. When she organizes supply carts, muscle memory takes over. Trauma shears go here. Compression dressings here. Airway management supplies in sequential order. The setup of someone who once prepared for casualties instead of routine pediatric assessments. The muscle memory of someone who has held lives together. She finishes the cart. Rolls it into place. The wheels squeak, a sound like protest. 2 hours later, Danielle sits at the break room computer reviewing patient charts. The task is routine. She's cross-checking medication orders against billing records, a task assigned to all new staff as part of orientation. Tedious work. The kind of work people do while thinking about their evening, their rent, whether they remembered to pay the electric bill. But Danielle has been trained to see patterns in chaos. She circles something in pencil. A consultant charge for a neurology evaluation on patient file 447. Date of service listed as Tuesday. She checks the surgical log. The child was in recovery on Tuesday. Unconscious. Unable to be seen by any consultant. She circles another charge. Pediatric cardiology consultation. Same patient. Different Tuesday. The child was discharged that Monday. The pattern repeats. 42 phantom consultations across 63 pediatric cases over the last 4 months. Charges totaling $187,400 to insurance companies that don't ask questions when the paperwork looks pristine. The handwriting is consistent. The billing codes are current. The doctor's signatures are. You finding something interesting? Danielle's hand stills. She doesn't look up. Doesn't startle, though every muscle tenses with the precision of a warning system. Dr. Hargrove stands in the break room doorway, coffee mug in one hand, expression that says he's just curious, that's all. She closes the chart. Slow and deliberate. Just reviewing protocols. On your third day. He steps further into the room. The air pressure changes, not from anything he's done, but from what he represents. Authority that hasn't been questioned. Position that has never required justification. That's thorough. My apologies, doctor. I can finish this at home. She uses the voice she's been practicing. Deferential. Soft. The voice of someone who understands hierarchy and respects boundaries. The voice of someone who has nothing to hide because she is hiding everything. Hargrove watches her a moment longer. His eyes are pale blue, the kind of cold that comes with certainty. He notes the way she doesn't meet his gaze. The tremor in her hands when she reaches to set down the chart. Weakness. Anxiety. The kind of nurse who'll crack under pressure, who'll accept a write-up without complaint, who'll resign rather than escalate conflict. Make sure you understand how things work here at Sacred Heart before you start marking up our documentation, he says. Not a threat. Just information. We have procedures. Yes, doctor. He leaves. Danielle waits 45 seconds, counts them out in her head, then closes the browser without saving anything. The charts are back in their cabinet. The pencil is in her pocket. No evidence. No documentation. Just a pattern she's seen and can't unsee. That night she folds her jacket carefully in her locker, the movements deliberate and slow. The fabric is dark blue, from a thrift store in Lakewood, nothing distinctive. Nothing that says anything about anyone. But inside the lining, sewn with stitches that have held for 15 years, is a patch. Faded now. The gold threads oxidized to a dull bronze. A Coast Guard search and rescue unit insignia from operations that never made official records, from a time before everything broke. She touches the stitching. Feels the edges of the patch beneath the fabric. No one at Sacred Heart knows this exists. No one needs to know. The next morning, Danielle assists with an emergency appendectomy on a 7-year-old. Routine procedure. Standard complication rate. She stands across the surgical field from the lead surgeon, her job simple: anticipate needs, hand instruments, monitor vitals. She wears a surgical mask and cap. Becomes functionally invisible. The surgery is textbook. The closure is her hands moving on their own, the training reasserting itself without permission from her conscious mind. She threads a 4.0 subcuticular suture with the kind of fluid precision that comes from thousands of repetitions, the kind that exists in muscle memory below thought. Each pass of the needle through tissue is controlled. The tension perfect. The knot placement exact. And then the other nurse freezes. It's a moment so small most people wouldn't catch it. A half-second pause in her movement. Her eyes shift to Danielle's hands. The suture instruments. The way the thread runs through the needle. When the surgery ends, Danielle peels off her gloves in the scrub room. She has learned not to make eye contact in moments like this. Not to acknowledge when something has been seen. But the other nurse, older, maybe 55, with the kind of face that has weathered more than one deployment, steps closer. Her name is Janet. Former Army medic, 22 years of service, honorable discharge from Fort Bragg, worked 3 tours in places where the name alone carried weight. Danielle has avoided conversations with Janet since orientation. That closure technique, Janet whispers. I know that. Danielle doesn't look up. Focuses on disposing of the gloves. Standard wound management. No. Janet steps closer. The break room is empty except for them. Baghdad Field Hospital. 2009, I remember because we taught it to trauma nurses in the CSH, the Combat Support Hospital. And I remember because nobody else does it exactly like that. Danielle's hands pause for exactly half a second. Then resume. Removing the surgical cap. The mask. The shield. Becoming gradually more herself and less of the invisible surgical nurse. I was never in Baghdad, Danielle says. The lie is clean. Practiced. She has used it in 3 cities and twice in Denver already. Right. Janet nods, but her eyes don't believe it. And I wasn't either. She leaves. Danielle stands alone in the scrub room, the smell of antiseptic suddenly overwhelming, the fluorescent lights buzzing at exactly the frequency that triggers something she has spent 5 years trying to keep contained. She takes a measured breath. Then another. Counts to 10 before she moves. Janet's eyes held recognition. Recognition carries conversations. Conversations carry questions. Questions carry answers she has no intention of providing. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Hargrove had also been watching, visible through the surgical observation window, his expression unreadable as he witnessed Danielle's hands move with the precision of someone who had done this in contexts he could never imagine. The worst part was that Hargrove saw something in those hands that made his pale blue eyes sharper, colder, more certain that the quiet new nurse was a threat that needed managing. The worst part was that he was already making plans. The morning staff meeting at Sacred Heart began like every other Tuesday, fluorescent lights humming their sterile song above the assembled residents and nursing staff. Dr. Hargrove sat at the head of the conference table, his tailored blazer draped across the chair beside him, cufflinks catching the light like small mirrors reflecting his own satisfaction. Danielle stood in the back row, hands folded, her scrub still carrying the faint smell of antiseptic from the pre-dawn rounds. She had been there 72 hours. 72 hours of watching phantom consultations get billed to insurance. 72 hours of charting discrepancies that didn't add up. "I'm taking bets," Hargrove announced, his voice carrying the particular brightness of a man who'd already won before the game started. $50 says our newest nurse quits within a week. Any takers? He gestured toward Danielle with a casual wave. Nothing personal, sweetheart. Just pattern recognition. The ones who come in thinking they're going to change things, they never last. Residents laughed nervously. The kind of laughter that acknowledges power without questioning it. Danielle sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the wall behind Hargrove's head. One tear escaped down her cheek, not from sadness, but from the particular exhaustion of recognizing a threat you're not supposed to acknowledge. She wiped it without breaking her gaze. "I've held my place in worse storms than you, Doctor." The sentence came out quiet. Not defiant. Not defeated. Just factual, like she was reading a medical chart. The room went absolutely still. You could hear the fluorescent lights humming, a soft electric vibration that suddenly seemed very loud. Hargrove's smile didn't waver, but something in his pale blue eyes shifted, a predator recalculating the prey's threat level. The cafeteria at Sacred Heart occupied the hospital's southwest wing, all white tile and stainless steel serving stations, designed to feel sterile even while people ate lunch. It was crowded by noon, filled with the ambient noise of 50 conversations overlapping, the sound of community pretending the hierarchy doesn't exist. Danielle carried her tray to a quiet corner, a turkey sandwich, a cup of tomato soup, a juice box. Simple things. Unobtrusive things. Dr. Hargrove approached with his own tray, moving with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never been told no in an institutional setting. "Move along, Danielle. Doctor's table." His tone was light, casual, the tone of someone making a small request. She stood immediately, reaching for her tray to relocate. That was when his elbow caught the edge of the tray with the precision of a man who'd calculated the angle 3 times before executing it. The soup container flew, tumbling through the air like something falling in slow motion. The sandwich landed face down on the tile. The juice box burst open in a sticky spray. Food scattered across the white floor in front of approximately 50 witnesses. The conversations didn't stop all at once. They stopped in cascading waves, like dominoes of silence spreading outward from the impact point. Medical staff froze mid-sentence, mid-chew, their eyes suddenly very focused on their plates. Danielle knelt to clean it up without hesitation, gathering the pieces, her hands moving with the automaticity of muscle memory, the kind of movement that came from years of not making problems for other people. Around her, conversations restarted, cautious at first, then bolder, the collective agreement of a hierarchy that this had not happened, or if it had, it was not worth discussing. Then Hargrove dropped a stack of patient charts beside her kneeling form. The paper scattered slightly on the tile, some of them picking up the dampness from the spilled soup. "Pick those up too, sweetheart. You'll need to learn your place here." His voice carried the bright smile of someone who'd just successfully demonstrated power. He turned and walked away before she could respond. Danielle gathered the charts one by one, careful not to bend them despite the sauce staining their edges, despite her scrubs absorbing the liquid like they were designed for exactly this moment. She stood slowly, the charts stacked in her hands, and walked to the nurse's station. She set them down beside the printer with the precision of someone setting down a gun. Then she walked to the staff bathroom, locked the door, and looked at herself in the mirror. Her reflection showed a woman in blue scrubs with soup staining her left sleeve. Her eyes were steady. Her breathing was controlled. The trembling she felt in her hands wasn't fear. It was restraint, the same restraint that had kept her alive through 19 separate deployments, the same restraint that had let her walk away from a life that would have consumed her if she'd stayed. She washed her hands under water that was slightly too cold, watching the soap swirl away the evidence, and returned to work. That evening, a 12-year-old boy came in with acute appendicitis, the emergency kind that required immediate surgical intervention. Danielle assisted the attending surgeon, a man named Dr. Chen, who treated his staff with actual respect, a courtesy that felt almost shocking in its normalcy. The surgery was routine, open appendectomy, everything textbook, the kind of procedure that happened hundreds of times a day in hospitals across the country. But in the final stages, during the closure, another nurse froze. Her name was Maria Gonzalez, former Army medic, field-scarred and competent, the kind of person who'd seen enough to recognize what she was seeing. She stared at Danielle's hands as they executed a perfect field closure technique, precise, economical, the kind of suture pattern that could be tied in complete darkness or under fire and still hold. The technique came from a place deeper than nursing school. It came from places that had names like Baghdad and Helmand Province. "I know that closure," Maria whispered, her voice barely audible over the surgical drape. "I know that closure. Baghdad Field Hospital, 2009. Danielle's hands paused for half a second, the only hesitation that might have happened in the world. Then they continued working, the sutures perfect as always. "You're mistaken." Her voice was steady. "Professional. Final." She finished the closure without looking up. After the surgery, after the boy was transferred to recovery and his mother was brought to see him, Maria cornered her in the scrub room. The space was small and private, the air carrying that particular smell of soap and sterile water, the fluorescent light making everything look slightly too bright and slightly too real. "I was there," Maria said quietly. "I watched someone teach that technique to incoming medics. The same pattern. The same timing." Her eyes were dark, intelligent, recognizing. "Senior Chief." "You didn't see anything," Danielle cut her off, her voice dropping into register that made Maria physically step back. "Not threatening. Not angry. Just absolutely certain." She walked out before Maria could respond, leaving her standing in the scrub room with the knowledge burning in her chest. The next morning, Hargrove called her into his office. She recognized the setup immediately, his desk positioned as a barrier, his chair higher than hers would be, the power dynamics arranged like furniture. He tossed a nursing evaluation across the desk. It landed in front of her with the weight of consequence. Substandard performance. Failure to follow protocols. "I'm documenting everything, sweetheart." He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight, his pale blue eyes sharp now with the clarity of a man executing a strategy. "Any particular reason you're hiding here in Denver? Running from something?" Danielle didn't pick up the evaluation. She didn't flinch at the question. She simply stood, looked at him with the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst thing the world could offer, and walked out of his office. Behind her, she heard him making calls, not to specialists about cases, but to people who answered phones at board offices, people who understood that certain relationships mattered more than truth. She didn't know that everything was about to change. She didn't know that in approximately 4 hours, a 7-year-old girl would arrive at Sacred Heart's emergency entrance with a collapsed lung and a father's desperation. She didn't know that the choice she was about to make would echo across the hospital like a shockwave, bringing down everything Hargrove had built. But some part of her, the part that had survived multiple deployments, that had learned to read danger the way other people read weather, understood that the storm was coming. And she was ready. The 911 call came in at 2:06 p.m. on a Tuesday. 7-year-old Emma Peterson had fallen from the jungle gym at Cheeseman Park, landed hard on her ribs, and wasn't breathing right. Commander James Peterson, Coast Guard Search and Rescue, was still in uniform when the ambulance brought his daughter through the ER doors. Emma's small frame made the stretcher look enormous. Her hands were moving, signing frantically to her father, but her lips were taking on a bluish tint. The playground had stolen her breath. Now Sacred Heart's pediatric trauma team was trying to give it back. Danielle was in the supply closet, restocking pediatric airway kits, when she heard the overhead page. Trauma alert. Pediatric. Tension pneumothorax suspected. The words hit her like a physical thing. She knew what that meant. Collapsed lung. Air trapped in the chest cavity. In a 7-year-old, minutes mattered. Maybe less. She moved toward the trauma bay without thinking, her hands already knowing what they needed. 14-gauge needle. Catheter. Everything for a decompression. The muscle memory didn't ask permission. It just moved. The trauma bay was controlled chaos, the kind of choreography that looks random until you understand it's the difference between life and death. Emma lay on the stretcher, her chest rising in shallow gasps, her small face twisted with fear and lack of oxygen. Commander Peterson stood at the glass barrier, his dress blue uniform crisp and powerless. He was signing to his daughter with shaking hands. "I'm here. You're safe. Don't be scared." The words his hands made were lies they both needed to hear. Dr. Marcus Heisman, the attending physician, stood over Emma with a stethoscope, listening to breath sounds that were getting fainter on the left side. "Decreased air entry," he said. His voice had the careful precision of someone stating the obvious because it had to be said. "Left side is almost silent. Hypoxemia is advancing. We need to get her stabilized and moved to Denver Children's. They have a PQ, specialized pulmonology." He looked up at the nurses gathering around. "How long for transport?" "Weather's turning," Maria Gonzalez said. She was the senior charge nurse, a former Army medic who'd served in Baghdad the same years Danielle had. "Helicopters grounded. Ground ambulance is looking at 90 minutes, minimum. Traffic on I-25 is backed up past the airport." Dr. Hargrove appeared in the doorway like a shadow with a name. He was holding a coffee that steamed like his anger, watching Danielle with the intensity of a man who'd been waiting for an excuse. "What's the status?" His voice had that particular edge, the kind that made nurses check their protocols twice. It was the voice of a man who collected leverage. 7-year-old, blunt force trauma to the left thorax, Heisman said. Tension pneumothorax. We need to decompress before transport. Transport's 90 minutes, Hargrove said. It wasn't a question. Who's performing the procedure? I will, Heisman said. Needle decompression, second intercostal space, midclavicular line. Standard protocol. Hargrove set his coffee down on the crash cart. The gesture was deliberate, possessive. No, he said. His voice had dropped, gone quieter, which somehow made it more dangerous. You'll wait for pediatric surgery to consult. We're not doing field medicine in my hospital. Liability's too high. Some administrator with a law degree will use that as a reason to bury Sacred Heart in a malpractice suit. Heisman's jaw tightened. He was a good doctor. The kind who'd gotten into medicine because he believed in saving lives first and asking about insurance later. Now he was being told to let a 7-year-old girl's oxygen saturation crater because of liability. Her sat 79 and falling, he said flatly. At this trajectory, we're looking at cardiac arrest in minutes. The procedures indicated. It's standard of care. And I'm saying we wait, Hargrove said. He turned to leave, then paused. Get her on supplemental oxygen. Keep her calm. Call me when pediatric surgery gets here. He walked back toward his office, already pulling his phone from his pocket. Danielle watched him move, something cold settling in her chest. That phone call wasn't going to be about Emma's medical care. She was right. Within 5 minutes, while Heisman was increasing oxygen flow and monitoring Emma's deteriorating vital signs, Hargrove had made his first call. To Robert Chen, a board member who'd benefited from Hargrove's referral network, 17 patients in the last 6 months, all the surgeries profitable. Rob, I need you to understand that we have a potential protocol violation situation developing in pediatrics. A nurse is overstepping her scope of practice. I'm documenting everything, but you should know this is the kind of incident that creates liability if it's handled incorrectly. We need people we can trust making the right decisions." The words were wrapped in concern. The message was clear: Hargrove was calling in debts. His second call went to Patricia Del Vecchio at the insurance company that contracted with the hospital. "Patricia, I'm flagging a nurse in our pediatric ward for investigation. I've become aware of potential protocol violations, possible substance abuse issues based on behavioral patterns I've observed. I'm filing the formal complaint, but I wanted to give you a heads up so you can prepare your files. This could get ugly." Hargrove was building a file, creating a narrative, getting people invested in destroying Danielle before she could tell anyone what she'd actually seen. His third call was more subtle. He reached out to one of his referral contacts, a physician recruiter named Dr. Carlisle who placed medical staff at other hospitals. "Carlisle, I've got a question about professional references. I have a nurse in my department who's applied for positions elsewhere, and I want to make sure any future employers have accurate information about her reliability. What's the procedure for updating files when you have concerns?" Hargrove wasn't just attacking Danielle's current position. He was poisoning her next one. Emma's oxygen saturation was 75 now. The child's fingers were moving in fragmented signs, confusion setting in from hypoxemia. Her eyes were starting to glaze. Danielle moved to the bedside. She didn't ask permission. She pulled off her jacket and draped it gently across Emma's shoulders, tucking the faded fabric close. Inside the lining, the patch was there, the Coast Guard search and rescue insignia, the gold and blue that represented everything she'd been. The patch pressed against Emma's arm like a secret the child would never understand but might, in some wordless way, feel. Commander Peterson's hand stopped moving. He watched Danielle position her fingers over Emma's rib cage, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, with the precision of someone who'd done this in a Baghdad field hospital while rounds were coming in and the generator was dying. Her hands found the exact spot like they were reading a map written into her own body. "Do not touch that patient," Hargrove's voice came from behind her, sharp as broken glass. "Step back from the bedside. Now." Danielle looked at Heisman. His jaw was clenched. His eyes said he knew what the law was and what the right thing was, and they were pointing in opposite directions. His eyes also said he was terrified of Hargrove and this hospital and the way the system worked. His eyes said, "I want you to do this and I can't tell you to do this." Maria Gonzalez appeared with a 14-gauge needle and catheter, already prepped, her hands moving with the precision of someone who'd learned medicine in a place where hesitation got people killed. "I'm with you, Senior Chief," she said quietly. Just 4 words. But in those words was a confession. Maria had recognized something in Danielle's hands during that surgery days ago. Maria knew. Danielle met her eyes. 1 second. That was all. Acknowledgement. Recognition of another person who'd survived things that had no name. Then she inserted the needle. Precise. Controlled. The kind of movement that comes from training so deep it lives in muscle memory. The kind of movement that doesn't ask for permission because it's asking for a child's life instead. The hiss came immediately, the distinctive sound of air escaping from a pressurized space. 15 years since Baghdad, and Danielle could still hear that sound in her bones. The pressure releasing. The trapped air finding its way out. Emma gasped, her first real breath, color flooding back into her lips like someone had turned up the saturation on the world. The monitor's numbers started climbing. 82, 86, 91. Each number was a heartbeat Danielle's hands had brought back. Emma's fingers reached for the jacket draped across her small frame. She couldn't hear the alarms or the monitors or Hargrove screaming. But she could feel the fabric and the weight of it, and something in the gesture of being covered with it. Her eyes locked on Danielle's, the universal language of a child who'd been terrified and then wasn't. Who'd been drowning and then wasn't. Who'd been saved by hands that knew exactly what to do. Security, Hargrove's voice was barely controlled. "I want security in here now. Escort Nurse Ross from this building. Immediately, 2 guards came through the doors within seconds. Raymond was the older one, the kind of man who'd worked hospital security for 20 years and seen more ugliness than most people could stomach. He looked at Danielle as his hands came to her arms, and something in his expression shifted. It was the look of someone who knew she'd just saved a life and he was about to be part of destroying her for it. "You just ended your career, sweetheart," Hargrove said as they walked her toward the door. His face was red with fury, but there was something else underneath it, satisfaction. He'd been waiting for this moment. He'd been setting the trap and she'd walked right into it. "Don't be scared," Commander Peterson was signing to Emma, his hands shaking worse now. "Don't be scared, honey." But his eyes were on Danielle being escorted past the pediatric station where the nurses were pretending not to watch, pretending this wasn't happening, protecting their own jobs. What they didn't know was that Hargrove was already making the calls. Hospital administration first, a formal complaint filed. Unauthorized procedures, patient endangerment, insubordination. I'm recommending immediate suspension pending investigation. Then the State Nursing Board. I'm filing an incident report regarding a nurse under my supervision who performed a procedure outside her scope of practice without physician authorization. This may indicate a pattern of reckless behavior. Then the call that would do the real damage, the call to his network of board members and consultants and people who owed him favors. Build the narrative first. Make sure everyone who might ever hire Danielle knew she was toxic before she even understood she was falling. By 5:15 p.m., the notice came through Danielle's phone. License suspension, pending investigation. Effective immediately. She sat in her car in the parking lot and read the words like they were written in a language she used to speak but had forgotten. Unauthorized procedures. Patient endangerment. Under investigation. She was still parked there at 8:41 p.m. when the rain started, not a gentle rain but the kind that hammered the windshield like it had something to prove. The kind that matched the trembling in her hands. Except it wasn't fear making her hands shake. It was something worse. It was restraint. It was 18 years of discipline holding back the things she wanted to scream. True class is what you do when the lights go out. She'd learned that in a place where there were no lights, where there were only choices and consequences and the weight of lives depending on your hands. She'd learned that walking away from everything meant you could never walk back. She started the car and drove toward Fort Logan National Cemetery, where the rain fell on headstones and the grass was soaked black, and she stood at a grave that had her husband's name on it and said words that had no answer. The security guard's hand was gentle on her elbow, but it was still a hand pushing her toward the exit. Rain hammered the glass doors of Sacred Heart's emergency bay as Danielle walked through them, her scrubs still damp with Emma's blood and saline, her movements controlled even as her mind fractured into 1,000 pieces she refused to let show. The guard, Raymond, name tag visible, wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She didn't respond. Sorry didn't save lives. Sorry didn't reverse what she'd just done, what she'd been forced to do, what had felt like the only choice that wouldn't let a 7-year-old girl die on a hospital bed while doctors calculated liability. The suspension letter was waiting on her apartment table by 8 a.m., hand-delivered by hospital legal counsel. The watermark of Sacred Heart's letterhead looked official enough to burn. Pending investigation into an authorized medical procedure. Breach of protocol. Immediate suspension of nursing license. The word swam in front of her vision like flotsam in black water. She read it twice. 3 times. The third time, her hands were steady again, and she felt nothing at all. But that wasn't the worst part. By noon, Hargrove had already moved. 3 calls to board members whose children attended the same private school. 2 calls to insurance investigators, each mentioning pattern of reckless behavior and escalating instability. 1 email to the State Nursing Board with doctored incident reports claiming Danielle had failed to follow chain of command, that she'd acted without supervision, that her judgment was fundamentally compromised. He called a contact at the VA, a psychiatrist who owed him favors, and floated the possibility of severe, untreated PTSD. He forwarded hospital security footage to his network with the subject line, "Situation contained." The nurses finished. By the time the sun reached its highest point, Danielle Ross had become professionally radioactive. No hospital in Colorado would touch her resume. No agency would take her calls. The fraud she'd almost exposed was already buried under the smoking wreckage of her credibility. Danielle didn't drive home. She drove through Denver's rain-soaked streets for 3 hours, water streaming off the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it, her phone buzzing with messages she couldn't bring herself to answer. The suspension letter sat on the passenger seat, its edges curling from her wet hands. The radio played a song about second chances and she nearly laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Fort Logan National Cemetery sprawled across manicured grass that had turned black from the rain. White headstones stretched in perfect rows toward a horizon she couldn't see. Danielle parked at the perimeter and walked between them, her boots leaving prints that the rain immediately tried to erase. Captain Marcus Ross. 1979 to 2011. The stone was clean, always clean. Someone maintained it. She came here every few months but never stayed long, never let herself feel anything while standing there. Tonight she knelt in the mud and let the rain soak through her scrubs into her skin. I ran from who I was, she whispered to the stone, to the man beneath it, to the version of herself she'd buried when his flag came home folded into a triangle. Her voice wasn't supposed to shake. Senior Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross did not shake. But this voice, Danielle the nurse, Danielle the ghost, Danielle the woman trying to forget, this voice cracked like old leather. After Baghdad. After the mortars. After I couldn't hold a scalpel without your hands in mine, steadying me. I changed everything. New name from military records. Civilian job. Quiet. Nobody was supposed to know what I was. The rain fell harder, hammering against the headstones like 1,000 fists demanding entry. She pressed her forehead against the cold stone and felt it like a blessing and a curse simultaneously. I thought I could help people without being her anymore, Danielle continued, her hands trembling in the mud, just a nurse, just someone nobody would notice. Nobody would ask questions about. But tonight I saved that little girl the same way I saved those Marines in Ramadi, and they're destroying me for it. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, words meant only for the dead. I can't save anyone anymore, Marcus. I failed you. I failed Emma. I failed everyone who ever trusted me to be strong when the world was burning. She pushed back onto her heels, her uniform clinging to her body like a second skin, like a prison uniform, like the weight of every choice she'd made since his casket came home. You got a medal for pulling those jarheads out of that burning Humvee, she said, and now her voice carried something else beneath the tremor, something old and bright and bitter as gunpowder. Bronze Star. Posthumous. They read it at your funeral and my hands were shaking so badly they had to hold the flag for me. What did they give me, Marcus? PTSD so severe I couldn't sleep in the same room with another person for 5 years. Nightmares that made me scream myself awake at 0300, soaked in sweat, reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. Survivor's guilt that tastes like copper and rust and the specific way your blood smelled in the sand. She pressed her palms against the wet earth beside the headstone, and her hands looked foreign to her in the rainlight, the hands that had held his chest together with a hemostatic gauze and a prayer, the hands that weren't fast enough, weren't strong enough, weren't enough. She sat in the rain for 1 hour, then 2. Her phone had stopped buzzing. The world had moved on to other crises, other emergencies, other people who needed saving. The rain fell on white stone and on dead grass and on the living woman kneeling in the mud, and nobody came to find her because nobody knew where she was. That was the point. That was always the point. She had been so careful to be nobody that when it mattered, when one small girl needed someone to be somebody, they'd taken that away too. Back at Sacred Heart, on the 4th floor of the administrative wing, Dr. Hargrove worked late into the night. The suspension letter had been filed and processed. The investigation was already underway, meaningless at its core, deadly in its execution. He drafted the incident report himself, carefully chosen medical terminology to make Danielle's actions sound reckless rather than life-saving. Emergency needle decompression wasn't an elegant procedure performed by a trained trauma specialist. In his report, it became a desperate, unsupervised, dangerous act by a nurse with a history of instability. He selected his replacement, a younger woman with no combat experience, someone who would ask questions less frequently. He sent an email to his network at 11:53 p.m., situation contained. Investigation will take 3 to 4 months minimum. By that time, she'll be finished professionally. The fraud exposure is sealed. What Hargrove didn't know was that Commander James Peterson hadn't slept either. He'd spent the night watching hospital security footage, frame by frame, seeing the moment his daughter's oxygen saturation began climbing after Danielle's hands moved with absolute precision, seeing the moment a 7-year-old girl became viable instead of terminal. He'd made phone calls to people Hargrove didn't know existed, the Coast Guard JG office, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, federal healthcare fraud investigators in the District of Columbia, medical review boards, and finally, to a submarine captain he'd served with 22 years ago who now held enough authority to make other men's careers end with a single phone call. Emma, recovering in her hospital room, couldn't sleep either. The faded patch from inside Danielle's jacket lining, a Coast Guard search and rescue insignia, embroidered anchor and helicopter, was pressed against her small chest. Her fingers traced the stitching again and again, memorizing its texture, understanding on some level that this small piece of cloth was important, that the woman who'd worn it was important, that what had happened in that trauma bay had been important. She wanted to tell her father. She wanted to sign the story in 100 different ways. But she was 7, and sometimes children know to wait. The rain was still falling when Danielle finally left the cemetery. It would fall all night and into the next morning, and for 3 days after that, a relentless Denver downpour that turned the city into something gray and featureless and exactly matching her insides. She drove through it without seeing it, her hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing left in a world that had finally, completely, let her go. The rain stopped on the morning of the 3rd day. Danielle didn't notice. She'd been sitting beside Marcus's headstone for 72 hours, not continuously, but in stretches. The cemetery caretaker had stopped asking if she needed anything. Some people just needed to sit. Some people had forgotten how to stand. She was reading the same paragraph from the letter the hospital sent. Temporary suspension. Pending investigation. Unauthorized procedures. The words blurred together like watercolor. Dr. Hargrove's name wasn't on the letter, but she could feel him in every line, the careful language designed to bury her before she could speak. Her phone buzzed. She didn't check it. It had been buzzing for 3 days. Probably Janet, the army medic who'd recognized something in Danielle's hands during that surgery. Probably Maria Gonzalez from hospital administration. Probably people trying to help. Danielle had learned a long time ago that help was a word with conditions. The Denver skyline looked like something painted from memory, the right colors but somehow wrong. Office towers caught the morning light. Somewhere in those buildings, Dr. Hargrove was making phone calls. Somewhere in Sacred Heart's corridors, Emma Peterson was breathing because Danielle had pushed a needle into her chest cavity at exactly the right angle, through skin and muscle and into the space where a collapsed lung was suffocating a 7-year-old child. And now Danielle had no credentials and no future and no way to explain why she'd broken every protocol to save a girl who would never know her name. A car door closed in the distance. Danielle didn't look up. The cemetery was quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists between graves, where the living come to remember and the dead settle into their long sleep. Wind moved through the grass. That was all. She heard footsteps before she saw them. Multiple people. Walking with purpose. Danielle looked up slowly. Commander Peterson wheeled his daughter through the cemetery grass. Behind them came a woman in administrator scrubs, Maria Gonzalez. A tall woman in a military dress uniform with captain's insignia. And Raymond, the security guard who'd escorted Danielle out of Sacred Heart 3 days ago, his face carrying the weight of a man who'd been told to do something wrong and had done it anyway. Emma saw Danielle first. The child signed something rapid and excited. Commander Peterson translated without emotion, "She says the angel lady is here." Danielle stood. Her legs felt unfamiliar. "Commander, Maria Gonzalez stepped forward. Behind her, the captain moved into position, not aggressive, just present. The way military personnel stand when something important is about to happen. Senior Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross. The rank hung in the air like the moment before a helicopter touchdown. No one had called her that in 8 years. The words contained everything she'd buried. "My name," Danielle started, "is written in federal records as a decorated Navy SEAL Team medical specialist," Maria continued. 3 Navy Commendation Medals with combat via 12 years of active service. Training record shows you developed the trauma protocols used by Joint Special Operations Command medics from 2005 through 2009. Danielle's hands were shaking. She pulled them into fists. "That's not relevant." "It's entirely relevant," the captain said. Her voice carried the particular authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Because 3 days ago, you performed an emergency needle decompression on a tension pneumothorax with a pediatric patient in respiratory failure." "Correct." Emma wheeled herself closer. She held something faded and small. A Coast Guard search and rescue unit patch, the kind sewn into uniform jackets of people who jump from helicopters into impossible situations. The kind that stays with you when everything else falls away. "Found it," Emma signed. Her father's voice was steady as a compass. "In her jacket lining. The one the nice lady put on me." The patch was in Danielle's hand before she understood she'd reached for it. The stitching was precise. The anchor and helicopter emblem faded but unmistakable. She'd sewn this herself 17 years ago, on a jacket she'd worn into situations that had no name in the files that mattered. "The hospital board convened an emergency hearing this morning," Maria said. "Before Dr. Hargrove could present his fabricated evidence regarding your conduct, we presented ours." The captain stepped forward. Her name tape read Torres. "I'm Captain Maria Torres, 75th Ranger Regiment. I was present at Sacred Heart this morning to observe medical training. While there, I reviewed the incident report from 3 days ago. The needle decompression you performed used a 14-gauge angiocath inserted at the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Textbook execution. Under fire conditions, I'd say." "The patient is breathing," Raymond said quietly. "Emma Peterson is breathing because you wouldn't wait for permission." Maria pulled an envelope from her bag. Cream-colored. Official seals visible from across the grass. "Your nursing license is restored as of this morning. The hospital's internal investigation concluded you had no choice but to act. Dr. Hargrove's fabricated complaint has been withdrawn pending his own criminal investigation for healthcare fraud." Danielle couldn't process the words. They were English. She understood English. But her brain was moving at a different speed than sound. "There's more," the captain said. She nodded to Raymond. The security guard pulled out a document. His eyes met Danielle's. "I read your file this morning. After I knew what it said. I'm sorry I escorted you out." "You were following orders," Danielle said automatically. "Exactly," Raymond replied. "But some orders shouldn't be followed. Some people shouldn't be escorted anywhere except to where they're needed." Maria opened the envelope. The letterhead read Sacred Heart Medical Center. "The hospital board is offering you a position as education director for pediatric emergency medicine. Designing curriculum, mentoring residents, developing the department's crisis response protocols." She paused. The morning light caught the edges of the paper. "Salary is $120,000 annually. Benefits include health insurance, pension contribution, and tuition assistance for advanced degrees." Emma wheeled herself between Danielle and the adults. She signed something slow and careful. Commander Peterson's voice cracked slightly. "She says you saved her. She says she wants to be a doctor like you." Danielle looked at the child. 7 years old. Dark hair. Intelligent eyes. Alive because Danielle had pushed a needle into her chest and trusted her hands to remember what her brain had tried to forget. "I can't," Danielle whispered. Captain Torres stepped closer. "Can't what, Senior Chief?" "Go back. To that place. To pretending to be someone small enough to fit in the spaces people make for nurses." Danielle's hands were shaking harder now. "I walked away from who I was. I can't pretend I didn't. I can't go back and—" "You didn't walk away," Maria interrupted. The administrator's voice was different now. Quieter. "You walked away from the noise. From the things that break you over and over. But you kept being exactly what you were trained to be. When it mattered. When a child couldn't breathe." Emma signed again. Rapid. Insistent. "She says you're brave." "I'm not brave," Danielle said. "Brave people don't hide. Brave people don't run." Captain Torres crouched down to Emma's level. "When soldiers get hurt, really hurt, sometimes they need time away from the battlefield. That's not running. That's survival. Some of the bravest people I know spent years away from operations. Doesn't mean they stopped being warriors." The captain stood and looked directly at Danielle. "It means they learned how to fight differently. 47 lives. That's what your record says. 47 people you saved under direct fire in Baghdad. Nobody's asking you to do that again. We're asking you to teach the next generation how to do it. To pass on what you know to people who can save thousands instead of dozens." Danielle's hands unclenched. The patch was still there. The anchor and helicopter. The weight of it was impossible. 8 years of weight compressed into something that fit in her palm. "I don't know how to do this," she said. Maria stepped closer. "Then we'll figure it out together. You're not walking back in alone, Senior Chief. You're walking back as the person who saved Emma Peterson's life. The person who trained Navy medics. The person whose hands know what to do when everyone else is frozen." Commander Peterson moved beside his daughter's wheelchair. "My daughter was suffocating. 15 doctors in this city would have called Denver Children's and waited. You didn't wait. You did what needed doing." His voice carried the particular weight of a man who'd made impossible decisions at sea. "That's not hiding. That's command." The cemetery was very quiet. Wind through grass. The distant sound of a city that didn't know what was happening here. Around them, white headstones marked the people who'd given everything. Danielle could see Marcus's name from where she stood. "I'm scared," she said. Emma reached out and squeezed Danielle's hand. The child's grip was surprisingly strong. "Then we're scared together," Maria said. "But Denver's pediatric residents need someone who knows the difference between panic and precision. Someone who can teach them to move when movement means life. Someone with scars. With real scars. Not the kind you see. The kind that teach you something about yourself." Danielle looked at the faces surrounding her. A captain in military uniform. A hospital administrator. A security guard who'd made a choice about who he wanted to be. A commander who'd raised a deaf daughter and watched her communicate with absolute clarity about what mattered. And Emma, sitting in her wheelchair, clutching Danielle's hand like she'd found something that had been lost. "Okay," Danielle said. The word was very small. "Okay?" Maria repeated. "Okay," Danielle said again, and this time it came out stronger. "I'll teach them." Captain Torres saluted. Just a sharp movement of her hand to her forehead. "Welcome back, Senior Chief." Danielle's hands were shaking as they walked back through the cemetery toward the parking lot. Raymond drove them to Sacred Heart. Emma fell asleep in her wheelchair, still holding the faded unit patch. Maria pulled up the position details on her phone. Curriculum design. Mentorship. Simulation training. The things that break you, eventually, can teach you how to help others not break. 6 months later, the pediatric emergency medicine department at Sacred Heart had changed. New training protocols. Simulation labs upgraded with state-of-the-art mannequins that could collapse lungs and arrest hearts and teach residents to move with precision instead of panic. And a woman in scrubs with education director embroidered beneath her name, teaching a room of young doctors how to perform needle decompression while alarms screamed and actors played desperate families. Danielle's hands were steady. Mostly. Sometimes they still shook, but she'd stopped hiding that. Trembling hands that had learned to work anyway, that was the lesson worth teaching. Emma Peterson visited every Friday afternoon. She'd leave drawings on Danielle's desk. A nurse with angel wings. A stethoscope shaped like an anchor. A helicopter carrying hearts instead of rescuers. Pictures drawn by a 7-year-old who understood something about second chances and the people who give them. The drawings lined Danielle's office walls. Dr. Hargrove's trial concluded in month 4. 18 months in federal prison. Permanent revocation of medical license. Restitution of $847,000. The referring physicians who'd accepted kickbacks cooperated with prosecutors. The board members who'd overlooked his fraud quietly resigned. The network that had felt so powerful 3 days ago, when Danielle was sitting in the rain at a cemetery, had dissolved like morning mist. 6 months later, Raymond told her he'd seen Hargrove at a strip mall on Denver's outskirts, selling supplemental insurance from a folding table. Expensive suit replaced by wrinkled dress shirts. Authority reduced to explaining coverage options to people who wouldn't meet his eyes. Danielle nodded. That was his path now. Not her concern. Her concern was the residents she was training. The students who would become the doctors who would save thousands of lives that Danielle would never meet. The work that happened when the spotlight wasn't there, when nobody was watching except the people whose lives depended on you. True class is what you do when the lights go out. That night, teaching a late simulation, Danielle said that exact sentence to her residents. They listened the way people listen when they understand something true is being spoken. Outside in the parking lot, where no one could see, her hands shook as she got in her car. On her dashboard, mounted beside her nursing credentials, was the faded unit patch. The anchor and helicopter emblem. Proof that some things, once earned, never leave you. Even when you've walked away. Even when you think you're done. Especially then. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't see what you were truly capable of, please like this video and subscribe. Leave a comment below. What would you have done if you were Danielle, knowing the cost of acting and the cost of waiting? These stories matter because they remind us that the quietest people in the room might be carrying invisible credentials and impossible choices. Thank you for watching.